Confidence is a force we all crave, a secret weapon in the battles of life, relationships, and work. But what if confidence wasn't something you were born with, but something you could build, methodically and purposefully? Imagine waking up tomorrow with a newfound sense of assuredness, your decisions backed by unshakable resolve. The key to this transformation lies within the wisdom of Stoicism, a philosophy that has stood the test of time for over 2,000 years. Today, we'll explore 7 Stoic tactics, rooted in ancient teachings but incredibly relevant in the modern world. These tactics will not only bolster your confidence, but shape your character and empower your life choices. Let's dive into a timeless mindset that can change how you face every challenge with unwavering composure. I'll never forget the day I lost what I thought was the job opportunity of a lifetime. The rejection email arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I felt my world collapse. For hours, I sat paralyzed, convinced that this single setback had derailed my entire career. My mind spiraled through catastrophic scenarios: unemployment, financial ruin, the judgment of friends and family. In that moment, I had surrendered all my power to circumstances beyond my control, and I felt utterly helpless. But here's what I didn't realize then. I wasn't trapped by the situation itself. I was imprisoned by my perspective. The ancient Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius, who ruled one of the most powerful empires in history while battling plague, war, and political treachery, wrote something profound in his personal journal. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This wasn't just philosophical poetry. This was a practical tool he used daily to maintain his composure while the world burned around him. The Stoics understood something fundamental about human psychology that modern neuroscience has only recently confirmed. Our emotional state is determined not by what happens to us, but by how we interpret what happens to us. Two people can experience the identical rejection, failure, or setback, yet one emerges devastated while the other grows stronger. The difference? Perspective. This concept sits at the heart of what Stoics called the dichotomy of control, the recognition that some things are within our power and others are not. External events, other people's opinions, outcomes of our efforts, these lie outside our control. But our judgments, our responses, our interpretations, our effort, these belong entirely to us. When we confuse the two, when we invest our emotional energy in things we cannot control, we surrender our confidence and our peace of mind. Consider a public presentation that goes poorly. The external facts are neutral. You spoke, the audience responded in certain ways. Technical difficulties occurred. Whatever happened, happened. But notice how quickly we add interpretation. I'm terrible at public speaking. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. I've ruined my reputation. These judgments, not the actual events, create our suffering and erode our confidence. Marcus Aurelius faced this daily on a scale most of us cannot imagine. He dealt with betrayal from trusted advisors, military defeats, personal losses, and the weight of millions depending on his decisions. Yet, he maintained his confidence through conscious perspective management. When facing a difficult person, he would remind himself, "Today I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, the overbearing, the deceitful, but none of this disturbs me, for I cannot be harmed by another person's character, only by my own judgments." This practice transforms everything. When someone criticizes you unfairly, the Stoic perspective asks, "Is this within my control?" Their opinion is not. My response is, I can choose to see this as an opportunity to practice patience, to examine whether there's any truth worth extracting, to strengthen my character through adversity. Suddenly, what seemed like an attack becomes a training ground for confidence. The beauty of this approach is its universality. Whether you're navigating a career setback, a relationship conflict, or a personal failure, the principle remains the same. You cannot control what happened, but you control what it means and what you do next. That distinction, that razor-thin line between what's yours and what isn't, becomes the foundation of unshakable confidence. Let me share a practical example. Imagine you're passed over for a promotion you deserved. The immediate emotional response might be anger, disappointment, self-doubt. But pause. Apply the Stoic lens. What's outside your control? The decision itself, your manager's reasoning, office politics, perhaps even unconscious biases. Raging against these wastes your energy and corrodes your confidence. What's within your control? Your continued effort, your skill development, how you communicate your value, whether you stay or seek opportunities elsewhere, and crucially, how you frame this experience. Through the Stoic perspective, that rejection becomes something different, not a judgment on your worth, but information about this particular situation. Not an ending, but a fork in the road. You might think, this organization doesn't align with my growth right now. I have the power to develop my skills, explore other options, or demonstrate my value more effectively. This setback is not about my capabilities. It's about circumstances I cannot control, and therefore cannot let define me. This isn't positive thinking or self-deception. It's radical clarity about what actually matters, your agency, your response, your growth. The Stoics weren't optimists who believed everything would work out. They were realists who believed that no matter what happened, they retained the power to respond with virtue, wisdom, and strength. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, put it simply, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of our anxiety comes not from actual problems, but from our catastrophic interpretations of problems. When you learn to separate events from interpretations, you reclaim enormous power. The confidence that emerges from this practice is qualitatively different from shallow positivity. It's grounded in reality, tested by adversity, and unshakable because it doesn't depend on external validation. So here's your practical takeaway, the tool you can use today. The next time you face adversity, large or small, pause before reacting. Take a breath and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what actually happened, stripped of all interpretation? Second, what part of this situation is within my control? Third, how would my wisest, strongest self respond to this? This simple practice, repeated consistently, rewires how you process challenges. Instead of feeling victimized by circumstances, you'll begin to see yourself as the conscious creator of your response. That shift from passive recipient to active agent is where confidence lives, not in the absence of problems, but in the certainty that whatever happens, you possess the power to meet it with wisdom, strength, and grace. The Stoics didn't promise an easy life. They promised something better, the tools to face any life with confidence. And it begins with perspective, the choice to view the world through lenses that empower rather than diminish you. Picture yourself standing backstage minutes before delivering the most important presentation of your career. Your heart races, your palms sweat, and your mind floods with paralyzing what-ifs. What if you forget your lines? What if the technology fails? What if you humiliate yourself in front of hundreds of people? For most of us, these thoughts are the enemy, intrusive fears we desperately try to suppress. But what if I told you that the Stoics intentionally cultivated these exact thoughts as a pathway to unshakable confidence? This sounds counterintuitive, perhaps even destructive. Our culture preaches positive thinking, manifestation, and the power of optimism. Yet here were some of history's most successful, resilient individuals deliberately imagining worst-case scenarios. Were they pessimists? Quite the opposite. They understood something profound about human psychology. The fear of the unknown is far more paralyzing than the reality of the known. Seneca, the Roman philosopher and advisor to emperors, practiced what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. He would regularly set aside time to vividly imagine losing his wealth, his position, his health, even his life. This wasn't morbid obsession or catastrophic thinking. This was psychological armor, carefully forged through deliberate practice. The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles, Seneca wrote, takes away their power when they arrive. Think about that for a moment. Most of us live in denial of potential difficulties, hoping that by not thinking about them, we'll somehow avoid them. But this approach leaves us brittle, vulnerable, and shocked when inevitably something goes wrong. The Stoic approach creates the opposite, a flexible, resilient mind that can't be broken by circumstances because it has already mentally survived them. Consider the difference between two people facing the same challenge. Let's say starting a business. The first person, buoyed by enthusiasm and positive affirmations, launches without considering potential obstacles. When the first major setback arrives, a key partnership falls through, funding becomes scarce, or a product launch fails, they're devastated. They didn't see it coming. They haven't prepared emotionally, and now they question everything. The second person, practicing negative visualization, has already imagined these scenarios months before. They've asked themselves, what if my co-founder leaves? What if our first product completely fails? What if we run out of money in 6 months? More importantly, they've mentally walked through their response to each scenario. When the actual setback arrives, there's no shocked paralysis. Instead, there's recognition. Ah, this is one of the scenarios I prepared for. I know what to do next. This practice works because it exploits a quirk of human neuroscience. Our brains struggle to distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and actual experiences. When you mentally rehearse facing a difficulty, you're essentially training your emotional system to handle it before it happens. Athletes visualize their performance. Surgeons mentally rehearse complex procedures. Stoics visualize adversity. The principle is identical, but negative visualization serves another crucial purpose. It transforms our relationship with what we have right now. Seneca regularly imagined losing his wealth, his friends, his status. The result? Profound gratitude for what he currently possessed and liberation from anxious attachment to it. When you've genuinely contemplated losing something, not in a paranoid way, but in a clear-eyed, preparatory way, you appreciate it more fully and grip it less desperately. This creates a paradox. By imagining loss, you actually become more capable of enjoying what you have. The person who never considers losing their health takes it for granted and wastes it. The person who regularly imagines illness treats their body with care and gratitude. The person who never imagines relationship difficulties becomes complacent. The person who does treasures and nurtures their connections. Let me share how this works in practice, with a modern example. Imagine you're worried about an important medical test result. The typical approach is anxious avoidance, distracting yourself, hoping for the best, living in limbo. The Stoic approach is radically different. You sit down and deliberately imagine the worst-case scenario. The test is positive. You have a serious condition. Then, and this is crucial, you don't stop there. You imagine yourself handling it. You visualize making a treatment plan, adjusting your life accordingly, finding meaning even in adversity, perhaps even discovering strength you didn't know you possessed. What happens? The paralyzing fear often dissolves, not because you're no longer concerned about the outcome, but because you've proven to yourself that even the worst-case scenario is survivable. You've mentally survived it already. When the actual results arrive, whether good or bad, you're prepared. If they're good, you feel profound relief and gratitude. If they're challenging, you're not destroyed. You're ready. This practice fundamentally changes your relationship with fear. Fear thrives in the vague, the unnamed, the unexamined. When you shine the light of conscious examination on your fears, when you make them specific and then imagine surviving them, they lose their tyrannical hold over you. You realize that most of what you fear wouldn't actually destroy you. It would be difficult, painful perhaps, but survivable. Marcus Aurelius, leading an empire while literally sleeping in military tents during campaigns, wrote, "Nothing happens to any man that he is not formed by nature to bear." He'd already imagined defeat, betrayal, death, not to torture himself, but to prepare himself. When difficulties arrived, he met them with the confidence of someone who had already fought these battles in his mind. The businessman who has imagined bankruptcy isn't paralyzed by financial fear. He makes bolder, wiser decisions. The athlete who has visualized losing performs with less anxiety and more freedom. The person who has contemplated their mortality lives with greater urgency and appreciation. This is the gift of negative visualization, preemptive resilience that transforms potential trauma into manageable challenge. So here's your reflective exercise, your invitation to practice this ancient technique. Choose one fear that quietly haunts you. Perhaps it's professional failure, relationship loss, health challenges, or financial difficulty. Set aside 15 minutes in a quiet space. Close your eyes and deliberately, vividly imagine this fear coming true. Don't shy away from the details. Feel the discomfort. But then, and this is essential, imagine yourself on the other side of it. How would you cope? What resources would you draw upon? What would you learn? How might you even grow stronger? Do this practice regularly, and you'll notice something remarkable. The fears that once paralyzed you begin to seem manageable. Not pleasant, not desired, but survivable. And in that recognition lies tremendous confidence. The confidence of someone who knows that no matter what happens, they have the internal resources to handle it. The Stoics didn't practice negative visualization to become pessimists. They practiced it to become free. Free from the tyranny of circumstance, free from the paralysis of fear, free to act with confidence regardless of outcomes. That freedom, that confidence, is available to you right now. It simply requires the courage to look your fears in the eye and discover that you're stronger than you think. At 5:30 a.m. on a freezing January morning, I stood outside my shower, staring at the dial. Every fiber of my being screamed to turn it toward the comforting red zone. Instead, I twisted it all the way to cold and stepped in. The shock was immediate, overwhelming, almost violent. My body seized, my breath caught, and for 30 seconds I endured what felt like ice needles piercing my skin. When I finally stepped out, gasping and alive, something had shifted, not just in my body, but in my mind. I had voluntarily chosen discomfort, endured it, and emerged stronger. This is the essence of a Stoic practice that has been building confidence for over 2,000 years. The modern world is engineered for comfort. We have climate control, ergonomic furniture, food delivery apps, and entertainment on demand. Every inconvenience has been smoothed away, every discomfort eliminated. This sounds like progress, and in many ways it is. But there's a hidden cost. We've become soft, not just physically, but psychologically. When we encounter inevitable discomfort, a difficult conversation, a challenging project, an unexpected setback, we lack the mental toughness to handle it. We've had no practice. The Stoics recognized this danger millennia ago. Epictetus, who spent much of his life as a slave and lived with a permanent disability after his leg was broken by a cruel master, understood that strength comes not from avoiding adversity, but from embracing it. Difficulties are things that show a person what they are, he taught. But he went further, advocating that we shouldn't merely accept difficulty when it arrives, we should actively seek it out. This practice, which we might call voluntary discomfort, is perhaps the most immediately practical of all Stoic techniques. It's simple. Regularly expose yourself to controlled, manageable discomfort to build resilience, confidence, and self-control. The cold shower is one example, but the possibilities are endless. Fasting for a day, sleeping on the floor, walking instead of driving, saying no to small pleasures, enduring physical exercise, sitting in silence without entertainment. The purpose isn't punishment or asceticism for its own sake. The purpose is inoculation. When you voluntarily endure discomfort in small, controlled doses, you train your mind to recognize that discomfort isn't catastrophic. You prove to yourself repeatedly that you can tolerate more than you think. This accumulates into a deep reservoir of confidence that no affirmation or positive thinking can provide. Seneca practiced this regularly, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He would periodically live as though he were poor, wearing simple clothes, eating basic food, sleeping on a hard bed. Set aside a certain number of days, he advised, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" Notice the brilliance of that last question. By voluntarily experiencing what we fear, poverty, discomfort, deprivation, we rob it of its power over us. Think about how this applies to modern anxiety. Someone who fears losing their wealth lives in constant terror, enslaved by their possessions. But someone who regularly practices living simply, who knows from experience that they can be happy with less, cannot be controlled by this fear. They've already lived it voluntarily, discovered it wasn't as terrible as imagined, and thereby freed themselves. This principle extends far beyond material comfort. Consider social discomfort. Many people live in fear of embarrassment, rejection, or judgment. But what if you deliberately practiced small acts of social courage? Starting conversations with strangers, speaking up in meetings, sharing creative work publicly, asking for what you want. Each act of voluntary social discomfort is a repetition in the gym of confidence. Initially awkward and uncomfortable, but with practice, you develop psychological muscle that makes real challenges feel manageable. The neuroscience supports this ancient wisdom. Our brains are prediction machines that learn from experience. When we repeatedly expose ourselves to discomfort and survive it, even thrive through it, we literally rewire our threat response systems. What once triggered panic eventually becomes merely uncomfortable, and what once felt impossible eventually becomes routine. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor with unlimited luxury at his disposal, chose to sleep in military tents during campaigns and endure the hardships of his soldiers. This wasn't just solidarity, it was training. He was ensuring that comfort never became a requirement for his peace of mind. He could function, lead, and maintain his composure regardless of external conditions. That's the ultimate freedom. Not needing comfort to be confident and capable. There's also something profound that happens psychologically when you choose discomfort. It transforms your relationship with agency and control. Most discomfort in life feels inflicted upon us. Traffic, difficult co-workers, unexpected bills, illness. We feel victimized by circumstances, but when you voluntarily choose discomfort, you reclaim your sense of control. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You're the architect of your experience, deliberately forging yourself into something stronger. I've seen this transformation firsthand in countless ways. The person who starts doing daily cold exposure reports feeling more capable of handling difficult conversations at work. The person who practices intermittent fasting finds they have more discipline in other areas of life. The person who commits to challenging physical exercise discovers mental toughness that carries over into creative projects. The specific discomfort almost doesn't matter. What matters is the practice of choosing it, enduring it, and emerging unchanged in your core, but strengthened in your capacity. This is radically different from the suffering that breaks people. Voluntary discomfort is bounded, controlled, and chosen. You're not suggesting anyone seek trauma or abuse. You're suggesting strategic exposure to manageable challenge. It's the difference between randomly getting thrown in the deep end of a pool and gradually learning to swim in progressively deeper water. The practice builds on itself. Your first cold shower might last 30 seconds and feel impossibly hard. 2 weeks later, 2 minutes feels manageable. A month later, you might even look forward to it, not because it's comfortable, but because you've come to associate it with strength and aliveness. This progressive overload, the same principle used in physical training, applies to psychological resilience. Here's what makes this practice so powerful for confidence. It provides objective evidence of your capabilities. You're not telling yourself you're strong or capable. You're proving it through action. Every time you choose discomfort and persist through it, you're making a deposit in your confidence account. These deposits compound. The person who has repeatedly chosen difficulty knows, in their bones, that they can handle challenges. It's not theory or hope. It's demonstrated reality. So here's your invitation to practice. Identify one small, manageable discomfort you can introduce into your daily life. Perhaps it's that cold shower, or a weekly fast, or daily exercise, or 30 minutes without your phone, or speaking up once per day when you'd normally stay quiet. The specific practice matters less than the consistency and intentionality. Start small enough that you'll actually do it, but challenging enough that it requires genuine effort. As you practice, pay attention to what happens. Notice not just your growing tolerance for that specific discomfort, but how your general confidence increases. Notice how challenges that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. Notice how your self-trust deepens as you repeatedly prove to yourself that you can do hard things. The Stoics weren't superhuman. They simply understood that strength isn't found in comfort. It's forged in the deliberate choice to endure difficulty. Every cold shower, every challenging workout, every voluntary sacrifice is a rehearsal for life's inevitable hardships. When real adversity arrives, and it will, you won't be the person who collapses at the first sign of discomfort. You'll be the person who thinks, "I've trained for this, I can handle this, I've done harder things by choice." That quiet certainty, that deep knowing of your own resilience, is confidence in its truest form. 3 years ago, I launched a project I'd poured my heart into for months. I was convinced it would succeed spectacularly. Instead, it failed spectacularly. Not just a little short of expectations, it completely collapsed. The product nobody wanted, the audience that never showed up, the vision that turned out to be just a mirage. In those brutal weeks after the failure, I faced a choice that would determine not just my next project, but my entire relationship with confidence for years to come. I could hide from the failure, make excuses, blame external circumstances, or I could do something far more difficult and ultimately transformative. I could own it completely. We live in a culture that treats failure as shameful, something to be hidden, minimized, or explained away. From childhood, we're taught that failure is the opposite of success, a verdict on our worth and abilities. Social media amplifies this, showing us carefully curated highlight reels while hiding the countless failures behind every success. The result? Most of us develop an almost pathological fear of failure that paradoxically guarantees we'll either avoid ambitious pursuits or be devastated when inevitable setbacks occur. The Stoics had a radically different relationship with failure. They didn't celebrate it in the hollow corporate way of failing fast and learning experiences. They went deeper, recognizing that failure is not just inevitable but essential, and that our response to failure is one of the most powerful determinants of our character and future success. Marcus Aurelius, reflecting on his own mistakes and shortcomings, wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This wasn't mere wordplay. It was a fundamental reorientation toward obstacles and failures. The thing you think is blocking you is actually the path forward, if you can learn to see it correctly. Consider the alternative. The person who cannot accept failure must either attempt nothing ambitious or live in constant terror. If your self-worth is contingent on never failing, you're trapped. You'll only pursue guaranteed successes, which means you'll never grow beyond your current capabilities. Or you'll attempt something bold, hit an inevitable setback, and experience not just the practical problem, but also existential crisis, because failure has become a referendum on your identity. The Stoic approach liberates you from this prison. When you accept, truly accept, in your bones that failure is a necessary part of any meaningful pursuit, you can finally act with genuine confidence. Not the brittle confidence of someone who's never been tested, but the deep confidence of someone who knows they can fail and survive. Let me be clear about what acceptance means here. It's not resignation or fatalism. It's not saying, "I'll probably fail, so why try?" It's recognizing that in any ambitious endeavor, you will encounter failures and setbacks, and that these moments are where growth actually happens. The entrepreneur who's never had a failed business hasn't learned the crucial lessons that make future success possible. The athlete who's never lost hasn't developed the mental toughness required for championship performance. The artist who's never created something terrible hasn't pushed their boundaries enough to create something extraordinary. Epictetus, who endured slavery and disability, taught his students a powerful reframe. Don't seek for everything to happen as you wish it would, but rather wish that everything happens as it actually will happen, and your life will flow well. Applied to failure, this means don't wish you never failed. Accept that you will, and prepare to extract every possible lesson from it. This acceptance becomes ownership. When something goes wrong, the immediate human instinct is to deflect blame. The project failed because of bad timing, difficult team members, market conditions, bad luck, anything but our own choices. And sure, external factors always play a role, but the Stoic recognizes that this deflection, while emotionally protective in the short term, is catastrophically damaging in the long term. When you blame external circumstances for your failures, you implicitly surrender your power to external circumstances. You're saying, "I'm not in control. I'm a victim of forces beyond me." This might feel better momentarily, but it obliterates confidence. How can you be confident in your ability to succeed when you believe success is determined by factors outside your control? The alternative is radical ownership. When my project failed, I could have blamed the market, the timing, my collaborators. Instead, I asked, what did I control? What decisions did I make? Where did I misjudge? What could I have done differently? This inquiry was painful, genuinely painful, because it meant acknowledging my own errors, overconfidence, and blind spots. But it was also empowering, because it meant every failure contained lessons that would make me more capable next time. Seneca wrote extensively about his own mistakes and poor judgments, not as confessions, but as learning opportunities. He understood that owning your failures is actually the ultimate display of strength. It takes far more courage to say, "I failed and here's what I did wrong," than to hide behind excuses. And paradoxically, this vulnerability, this honest acknowledgement of failure, builds more genuine confidence than any amount of bravado or self-deception. Here's what happens when you practice radical ownership of your failures. You stop fearing them. When failure isn't a threat to your identity, but simply feedback about your current approach, you can experiment more freely. You can take intelligent risks. You can push your boundaries. And crucially, when you do fail, you bounce back faster because you're not wasting energy on denial or blame. You're immediately extracting lessons and adjusting course. Think about the most confident people you know, not the arrogant ones who've never been challenged, but those with deep, quiet confidence. Almost universally, they're people who've failed significantly and learned to own those failures without shame. They're not haunted by past mistakes because they've integrated them. The failure isn't something that happened to them. It's something they experienced, learned from, and transcended. This creates a transformative cycle. When you own a failure completely, you extract maximum learning. When you extract maximum learning, you increase your capabilities. When your capabilities increase, you're more likely to succeed next time. And even if you fail again, you've proven to yourself that failure isn't fatal. It's information. Compare this to the person who cannot own their failures. They blame circumstances, get bitter, or avoid trying again. They extract minimal learning because they're too busy defending their ego. Their capabilities stagnate. Future attempts are undermined by unexamined patterns, and worst of all, their confidence erodes because deep down, they know they're lying to themselves about who's responsible. Let me share a framework that makes this practical. When you encounter a failure, and you will, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what specific actions or decisions did I make that contributed to this outcome? Be ruthlessly honest. Second, given what I now know, what would I do differently? This transforms hindsight into wisdom. Third, what capabilities do I need to develop to handle this type of situation better in the future? This transforms failure into a development roadmap. These questions only work if you're willing to own your role completely, not in a self-flagellating way. The Stoics weren't advocates of shame or self-punishment, in a clear-eyed, growth-oriented way. You're not a bad person for failing. You're a learner who now has more data. This practice fundamentally changes your relationship with risk and ambition. When failure is no longer an existential threat, but simply a potential learning experience, you can pursue meaningful goals without paralyzing fear. Your confidence isn't based on never failing. It's based on knowing you can fail, learn, and continue. That's an infinitely more robust foundation. So here's your invitation, your moment of reflection. Think of one significant failure in your past, perhaps one you've been avoiding examining honestly. Set aside your defenses and ask yourself, what was my role? What did I control that I could have done differently? What can I learn from this that will make me more capable going forward? This exercise might be uncomfortable. Good. The discomfort is the price of growth. On the other side of that honest examination lies something precious. Genuine confidence rooted not in an unblemished record, but in demonstrated resilience and learning capacity. The Stoics didn't promise you wouldn't fail. They promised something far better, that when you do fail, you'll have the tools to transform that failure into the foundation of future success. Failure doesn't diminish you. Only denial of failure does that. Own it, learn from it, and become stronger. That's where true confidence lives. I'm writing this sentence while my phone sits face down in another room, notifications silenced, email closed, and every potential distraction systematically eliminated. This wasn't always my practice. There was a time when I worked with a dozen tabs open, notifications pinging constantly, my attention fracturing into smaller and smaller shards. I told myself I was being productive, staying connected, keeping options open. In reality, I was training myself into chronic distraction and watching my confidence quietly erode with each scattered moment. The connection between focus and confidence isn't immediately obvious, but it's profound. When your attention scatters constantly, you never fully complete anything. When you never fully complete anything, you don't build evidence of your capabilities. When you lack evidence of your capabilities, your confidence remains theoretical, untested, ultimately hollow. The Stoics understood this intimately. Confidence grows from the soil of sustained attention and completed action. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire that spanned 3 continents while facing plague, warfare, and endless political intrigue, had every excuse for distraction. Yet he wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." External things are not the problem. It's your assessment of them, and that can be erased right now. In another passage, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. These aren't generic platitudes about living in the moment. They're specific instructions about focus. Direct your attention to what matters right now, ruthlessly eliminate distraction, and act with clarity on what's within your control. The modern world is engaged in an all-out assault on your attention. Every app, website, and platform employs teams of engineers whose sole job is to fracture your focus and capture your eyes. Notifications are carefully timed to create behavioral loops. Infinite scroll eliminates natural stopping points. Algorithm-driven feeds are optimized for compulsion, not value. The result? The average person's attention span has collapsed. Their ability to sustain focus on difficult tasks has atrophied, and their confidence has suffered in ways they don't even recognize. Here's why this matters for confidence. Complex, meaningful work, the kind that actually builds competence and self-trust, requires sustained attention. You cannot write a thoughtful article, solve a difficult problem, build a valuable skill, or create meaningful work while checking your phone every 3 minutes. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your output, which determines your justified confidence in your abilities. When you work in a scattered, distracted state, you know, at some level, that you're not giving your full capacity. You might complete tasks, but there's always a nagging sense that you could have done better if you'd been fully present. This erodes confidence more subtly, but more completely than outright failure. At least with failure, you know you gave it your all. With chronic distraction, you never discover what you're actually capable of. The Stoic discipline of focus operates on several levels. First, there's focus on what you can control versus what you cannot. We've explored this with the dichotomy of control, but it extends to attention management. Every minute you spend worrying about things outside your control, other people's opinions, economic conditions, political events, past mistakes, is a minute of attention wasted. Marcus reminded himself constantly, focus only on what's in your power. Everything else is noise. Second, there's focus on the present moment. The anxious mind lives in the future, catastrophizing about what might go wrong. The ruminating mind lives in the past, replaying mistakes and missed opportunities. Both states obliterate confidence because they pull attention away from the only place you have power, right now. Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. This isn't fatalism, it's radical focus on present action rather than past regret or future anxiety. Third, and perhaps most practically, there's focus on single tasking. The modern myth of multitasking has been thoroughly debunked by neuroscience, but we still pretend we can divide attention without cost. We can't. Every time you switch tasks, there's a cognitive cost, a attention residue that lingers from the previous task, degrading performance on the new one. Marcus Aurelius, despite having literally infinite demands on his attention, practiced militant single-tasking. Stop whatever you're doing for a moment and ask yourself, am I afraid of death because I won't be able to do this anymore? Let me illustrate the transformative power of focused attention with a modern scenario. Imagine two people working on the same challenging project. The first person works in 2-hour blocks of completely focused attention. Phone off, email closed, single task, full presence. The second person works in scattered 30-minute chunks, constantly interrupted by notifications, switching between tasks, never fully present. At the end of a week, who has made more progress? More importantly, who feels more confident in their abilities? The first person has engaged deeply, solved complex problems, built skills, and has concrete evidence of what they can accomplish with full attention. Their confidence grows from demonstrated capability. The second person might have logged the same hours, but they've built nothing substantial. No deep learning, no complex problem solving, no evidence of capacity. Their confidence remains untested hypothesis. This dynamic explains something puzzling about modern life. Despite unprecedented access to information, tools, and opportunities, many people feel less confident than previous generations. Part of the answer lies in chronic distraction. When you never sustain attention long enough to complete something meaningful, you never build real competence. You remain perpetually surface level, dabbling but never mastering, starting but never finishing. The Stoics also connected focus to what they called prohairesis, the faculty of choice and moral will. Epictetus taught that this was the only thing truly our own, the only thing that couldn't be taken by tyrants or circumstances. But prohairesis only functions when you're focused enough to use it. In distraction, you're not choosing, you're reacting, being pulled by impulse and external stimulus. In focus, you're exercising your highest human capacity, conscious, intentional choice. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of concentration, warning that a mind spread across too many concerns accomplishes nothing. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. He advocated what we might call time blocking, setting aside sacred periods for deep thought and work, protected from interruption. He practiced this himself, despite being one of the most politically connected and socially obligated men in Rome. Every day included periods of complete withdrawal for reading, writing, and contemplation. These weren't luxuries. They were the foundation of his effectiveness and his confidence. There's a profound psychological mechanism at work here. When you practice sustained focus, you enter what modern psychologists call flow states, periods of complete absorption where time seems to disappear and your capabilities expand. These states are where peak performance happens, but more importantly for our purposes, they're where genuine confidence is forged. In flow, you directly experience what you're capable of when you bring full attention to a challenge. This experience is infinitely more powerful than any affirmation or motivational speech. Consider the confidence of a craftsman, a carpenter, a surgeon, a musician, who has spent thousands of hours in focused practice. Their confidence isn't based on positive self-talk. It's based on the direct, repeated experience of sustained attention producing mastery. They know what they can do because they've done it, over and over, with full focus. This is confidence in its most authentic form. Now contrast this with the pseudo-confidence of someone who's never sustained attention long enough to develop real skill. They might talk a good game, project bravado, even temporarily convince themselves and others. But there's always a hollowness, a brittleness. When tested, the facade cracks because there's no substance beneath it. Real confidence requires the substance that only focused practice can build. The discipline of focus also creates what we might call cognitive sovereignty. In distraction, you're enslaved to your impulses, to algorithms, to whoever or whatever can capture your attention. In focus, you're free. You've reclaimed the most valuable resource you possess, the conscious direction of your mental energy. This sovereignty is itself deeply confidence-building. You're no longer a leaf blown by every wind. You're an agent consciously choosing where to direct your power. Marcus Aurelius faced a unique version of this challenge. As emperor, he had legitimate demands on his attention from every corner of the empire. Yet he developed what we might call strategic focus. He would identify the essential issues, the things that truly mattered, and give them his full attention. Everything else, no matter how urgent it seemed, was delegated or ignored. He wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" This ruthless prioritization allowed him to maintain focus on what was actually important rather than merely urgent. This practice translates directly to modern life. Most of what screams for our attention isn't important. It's just loud. The email that seems urgent, the notification that seems pressing, The news that seems critical, most of it is noise that will be irrelevant tomorrow. The discipline is to constantly ask, what deserves my focus right now? What am I actually trying to accomplish? What's the one thing that, if I gave it my full attention, would make the biggest difference? There's also a meditative quality to Stoic focus that differs from mere productivity hacking. It's not just about getting more done, it's about being fully present with whatever you're doing, even if that's something simple. Washing dishes with full attention, walking with full presence, listening to another person without planning your response. This comprehensive focus creates a quality of attention that permeates your entire life, and with it comes a deep confidence in your ability to be present with reality as it is. Let me share practical techniques for developing this discipline, drawn from both Stoic teaching and modern understanding. First, create sacred containers for deep work. Set aside specific times, even if just 1 hour per day initially, where you eliminate all potential distractions. Phone off, internet blocked if necessary, door closed. During this time, focus on one significant task with full attention. Don't check email. Don't peek at messages. Just work. Second, practice what Marcus called removing impressions. Throughout the day, notice when your attention gets hijacked by a notification, a wandering thought, an emotional reaction. Pause, take a breath, and consciously redirect your attention to what you chose to focus on. This micro-practice, repeated hundreds of times, trains attentional control like a muscle. Third, conduct regular focus audits. At the end of each day, honestly assess, how much time did I spend in focused, intentional action versus scattered, reactive distraction? What pulled me off course? What enabled deep focus? This isn't about judgment. It's about data. You can't improve what you don't measure. Fourth, establish clear stopping points and transitions. One reason we stay perpetually distracted is we never fully finish one thing before starting another. When you complete a focused work session, mark it. Close the laptop. Take a walk. Create a clear boundary. This allows your mind to consolidate learning and prepares you to bring full attention to whatever comes next. Fifth, practice progressive focus training. Start with 25-minute focused sessions if that's all you can sustain. Build gradually to 50 minutes, then 90, then 2 hours. Like physical training, attentional capacity develops through progressive challenge. Don't expect to immediately sustain hours of deep focus if you've been training chronic distraction for years. The transformation this creates extends far beyond productivity. As you develop the capacity for sustained attention, you'll notice your confidence growing in direct proportion. You're completing meaningful work, building real skills, and accumulating evidence of your capabilities. But more subtly, you're developing self-trust. Each time you commit to focus and actually do it, you're proving to yourself that you can do what you set out to do. This keeps compounding. Consider the alternative trajectory. Someone who never develops focus drifts through years, perpetually busy, but never truly productive, starting dozens of projects but finishing few, knowing at some level that they're not operating at their capacity. How can genuine confidence develop in that pattern? It can't. Confidence requires the foundation of demonstrated capability, which requires sustained attention. There's a beautiful moment in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations where he writes, "Concentrate every minute, like a Roman, like a man, on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, tenderly, willingly, with justice." Notice the specificity. not just doing what's in front of you, but doing it with full presence and commitment. This is the essence of Stoic focus, bringing complete attention to each moment, each task, each choice. This practice culminates in what we might call flow of life, not just flow states during work, but a general sense of moving through the world with clarity, purpose, and presence. When you've trained your attention, you're no longer buffeted by every distraction. You can sit with difficulty without needing to escape into distraction. You can sustain effort toward meaningful goals. You can be fully present with other people. This creates a quality of confidence that's less about believing in yourself and more about simply knowing what you're capable of through repeated demonstration. Here's your practical invitation to begin. Choose one activity today. It could be work, conversation, exercise, even washing dishes, and commit to giving it 100% of your attention for its duration. Notice when your mind wanders. Gently bring it back. Don't judge yourself for the wandering. That's normal. Just practice the return. That simple exercise, repeated consistently, will begin rebuilding your capacity for focus. Then extend this practice. Tomorrow, add another focused activity. By week's end, you might have several islands of full attention in your day. Over months, these islands expand and connect until focused attention becomes your default rather than distraction. And as this happens, notice what occurs with your confidence. Not the loud, boastful confidence of someone trying to convince themselves, but the quiet, solid confidence of someone who knows they can direct their attention, complete meaningful work, and show up fully for whatever life presents. The Stoics didn't just talk about focus, they lived it in circumstances far more distracting and demanding than most of us will ever face. Marcus ruling an empire, Epictetus teaching while enslaved, Seneca navigating treacherous political waters. Yet they maintained the discipline of attention because they understood. This is where power lives, not in controlling external circumstances, but in controlling the one thing that's truly yours, your attention and how you deploy it. In our hyper-connected, deliberately distracting age, this discipline is more countercultural and more necessary than ever. Everyone around you will be scattered, reactive, perpetually distracted. But you have a choice. You can reclaim your attention. You can build the capacity for sustained focus. And in doing so, you'll build something far more valuable than productivity. You'll build genuine, tested, unshakable confidence. The confidence that comes from knowing you can direct your full power toward what matters, and that when you do, you're capable of far more than you imagined. That confidence, forged in the discipline of focus, is the foundation upon which everything else rests. The Stoics knew it, and now, so do you. The argument started over something trivial. I can't even remember what now, but within seconds I felt the familiar surge of anger rising through my chest. My heart rate spiked, my jaw clenched, and words formed on my tongue that I knew I'd regret. In that moment, I stood at a fork in the road that appears dozens of times each day. React immediately to the impulse, or pause and choose my response. For years, I'd taken the first path automatically, letting emotions dictate my actions, then dealing with the aftermath. But that day, I paused. Just 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, everything changed. This is the essence of self-control, and it's perhaps the most misunderstood virtue in the Stoic arsenal. When most people hear self-control, they imagine white-knuckled repression, denying yourself pleasure, living like an austere monk. But the Stoics meant something radically different and far more powerful. Self-control isn't about suppressing who you are. It's about becoming who you want to be. It's the difference between being controlled by your impulses and consciously directing your life. Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. As emperor, he had unlimited access to every pleasure, vice, and indulgence imaginable. No one could have stopped him from giving in to anger, lust, greed, or any other impulse. Yet he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. The power he's describing is self-control, the ability to stand between stimulus and response and consciously choose. This is where genuine confidence is forged. Think about it. When you're controlled by your impulses, emotional reactions, cravings, immediate gratification, you're essentially a puppet. External circumstances pull your strings and you dance. Someone criticizes you, you react defensively. You feel an urge, you indulge it immediately. A difficulty arises, you avoid it. In this state, how can you be confident? You're not even in control of yourself. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine being able to pause before reacting emotionally, to feel a craving but choose whether to indulge it, to face difficulty without immediately seeking escape. This isn't superhuman, it's simply self-control. And the confidence that comes from this is profound because it's based on demonstrated self-mastery. You know you can trust yourself because you've proven repeatedly that you're in the driver's seat. Epictetus, who lived much of his life enslaved and therefore had almost no control over external circumstances, became obsessed with the one thing he could control: his responses, his judgments, his will. He taught, "No one can hurt you without your consent. No one can degrade you unless you allow it." This sounds empowering, but it comes with a sobering responsibility. If no one else controls your responses, then you must. That requires self-control. Let's be specific about what this looks like in practice. Self-control operates across several domains, each contributing to confidence in different ways. First, there's emotional self-control, the ability to feel emotions without being controlled by them. The Stoics didn't advocate for becoming emotionless robots. They acknowledged that emotions arise automatically. What matters is what you do next. When anger arises, the person without self-control lashes out immediately, says things they regret, damages relationships, then feels worse about themselves. Their confidence erodes because they can't trust themselves not to self-sabotage. The person with self-control feels the anger, recognizes it, but chooses their response. Maybe they take a breath and respond calmly. Maybe they say, "I need a moment before I respond to this." Maybe they use the anger as information about their values without letting it drive their behavior. Each time they do this successfully, their self-trust and confidence grows. Second, there's control over immediate gratification. We live in a culture engineered to exploit impulsivity. Every app, advertisement, and product is designed to trigger immediate desire and offer instant satisfaction. The result? Most people have atrophied impulse control. They feel the urge to check their phone, so they do. They want the dessert, so they eat it. They crave entertainment, so they binge watch. Each surrender to impulse is a tiny erosion of self-control and consequently confidence. Seneca warned about this. If you do not make time for your wellness, you will be forced to make time for your illness. He was speaking broadly, but the principle applies to self-control. Every time you give in to an impulse without conscious choice, you're training weakness. Every time you pause, consider, and then choose, even if you choose to indulge, you're training strength. Here's a practical example. You're working on something important when you feel the urge to check social media. The person without self-control simply picks up their phone, often without even conscious awareness they're doing it. 20 minutes later, they snap out of the scroll, feeling worse and having accomplished nothing. Their confidence in their ability to focus and follow through has taken another hit. The person practicing self-control feels the same urge, but recognizes it. I want to check my phone. Then they choose, I'm going to finish this paragraph first. Then I can decide if I still want to. Often, by the time they finish the paragraph, the urge has passed. But even if they do check their phone after, they've exercised choice rather than compulsion. This seems minor, but multiply it by dozens of decisions per day, and you see how self-control compounds into confidence. The third domain is control over negative thought patterns. Your mind generates thoughts automatically. Fears, doubts, criticisms, catastrophic scenarios. The person without mental self-control believes every thought, identifies with every worry, follows every anxious rabbit hole. The person with self-control recognizes, that's a thought. It's not necessarily true. I don't have to follow it. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. His meditations are full of him catching unhelpful thought patterns and consciously reframing them. It can ruin your life only if it ruins your character, he wrote. Otherwise, it cannot harm you, inside or out. This is cognitive self-control, choosing which thoughts to entertain and which to dismiss. The confidence this builds is remarkable. When you realize you don't have to believe every anxious thought, every self-doubt, every catastrophic prediction, you're suddenly free. You still feel fear or doubt, but you're not controlled by it. You can acknowledge the feeling and choose courage anyway. That's not fearlessness. That's self-control, which is far more valuable. So how do you actually develop this virtue? The Stoics offered several practices that remain powerful today. First, the practice of premeditatio, which we've explored as negative visualization, but which also applies to impulse control. Before entering a situation where you know you'll face temptation or emotional triggers, mentally rehearse your response. If you're going to a social event where you tend to drink too much, visualize yourself stopping after 2 drinks. If you're about to have a difficult conversation, imagine staying calm even if the other person gets angry. Second, the practice of morning and evening review. Each morning, set intentions. Today, I will pause before responding to criticism. Each evening, review. When did I exercise self-control well? When did I fail? What can I learn? Marcus Aurelius did this daily. It's not about achieving perfection, it's about conscious practice and learning. Third, start with small domains where you can practice successfully. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Pick one area. Maybe you'll practice pausing 3 seconds before responding to anyone today. Or you'll resist checking your phone for the first hour after waking. Or you'll skip dessert once this week. Make it small enough that you'll succeed, because each success builds confidence and makes the next exercise of self-control easier. Fourth, understand your triggers and weak points. Seneca advised, if you wish to put off all worry, assume that what you fear may happen is certainly going to happen. Applied to self-control, this means, know thyself. When are you most vulnerable to losing control? When tired, when hungry, when stressed, around certain people, in certain situations. Once you know your patterns, you can prepare for them rather than being blindsided. Fifth, practice the pause. This is perhaps the most powerful technique of all. When you feel a strong emotion or impulse, simply pause. Take 3 conscious breaths. Count to 10. Say, "I notice I'm feeling angry right now," rather than, "You made me angry." This tiny gap between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." The Stoics would completely agree. That space, that pause, that moment of choice, that's self-control. And exercising it repeatedly builds a kind of confidence that can't be faked or borrowed. It's the confidence of someone who knows they're in control of themselves. There's also a profound connection between self-control and the other Stoic virtues. You can't be courageous without self-control over fear. You can't be just without self-control over selfish impulses. You can't be wise without self-control over reactive emotions. Self-control is the foundation upon which all other virtues rest. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more self-control you develop, the less effort it requires. Initially, every exercise of self-control feels like a battle. The urge to react, to indulge, to follow the impulse is strong, and resisting it takes genuine effort. But with practice, it becomes easier. The neural pathways of self-control strengthen. The pathways of impulsivity weaken. Eventually, self-control starts to feel natural, even effortless. But you have to put in the work first. Let me be honest about the challenges. Developing self-control means you'll fail regularly, especially at first. You'll commit to not checking your phone during dinner, then find yourself scrolling without thinking. You'll promise yourself you'll respond calmly to criticism, then find yourself getting defensive. This is normal. The key is not to let failure discourage you. Each attempt, successful or not, is practice. Each time you notice you've lost control, that noticing itself is progress, because you can't regain control until you're aware you've lost it. The ultimate goal isn't perfection, it's progress. It's becoming more aware of your impulses and emotions and more capable of choosing your response to them. It's the confidence of knowing that even when you feel angry, scared, tempted, or overwhelmed, you still have choice. You're not a passenger in your own life. You're the pilot. Here's your practical starting point. Today, pick one area where you tend to act impulsively. Maybe it's emotional reactions, phone usage, food, spending, or something else. Set a simple intention to pause before acting in that domain just once today. Feel the urge, recognize it, take 3 breaths, then choose. Do this tomorrow and the next day. Within a week, you'll notice something shifting, not just in that domain, but in your general sense of self-trust and confidence. The Stoics taught that self-control is the gateway to freedom. When you're controlled by impulses, you're enslaved. When you can choose your responses, you're free. And with that freedom comes a confidence that no external circumstance can shake, because it's rooted in the one thing you truly control, yourself. I used to check my social media notifications compulsively, sometimes dozens of times per day. Each like sent a small rush of pleasure. Each comment required immediate reading and response. And when a post didn't perform well, when the validation I was seeking didn't arrive, I'd feel a creeping anxiety, a sense that something was wrong with me. I was, though I didn't realize it then, completely dependent on external validation for my sense of worth and confidence. I had outsourced my self-esteem to strangers on the internet, and they weren't even aware of the power I'd given them. This is one of the most common and corrosive patterns in modern life, and it's precisely what the Stoics warned against 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, speaking to his students about the path to freedom and confidence, said something that feels almost painfully relevant today. If you wish to live a life free of fear, don't concern yourself with things that are not up to you. Don't try to avoid what you cannot control, and what's less in your control than other people's opinions of you. The irony is profound. The more you seek confidence through external validation, the less confident you become. Each time you look outside yourself for approval, you're implicitly declaring that you don't trust your own judgment. Each time you adjust your behavior to earn praise or avoid criticism, you're surrendering your authenticity. And each time someone's opinion affects your mood or self-perception, you're proving that your confidence isn't really yours. It's borrowed, contingent, and therefore fragile. Marcus Aurelius, who held the most publicly scrutinized position imaginable, understood this deeply. As emperor, everyone had opinions about his decisions, his character, his actions. He could have spent every waking moment trying to please senators, soldiers, citizens, historians, even the gods. Instead, he wrote this remarkable passage. I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others. Think about that observation. You presumably know yourself better than anyone else does. You have access to your intentions, your growth, your efforts, your full context. Yet when someone else, who knows only a fraction of your story, judges you, their opinion somehow weighs more than your own. This is the trap of external validation, and it's a trap that makes genuine confidence impossible. Let me distinguish between two types of validation, because this nuance matters. There's information and there's approval. Information from others can be valuable, constructive feedback about your work, honest observations about your behavior, data about how you're being perceived. The Stoics weren't against gathering information. What they opposed was needing approval, requiring others to think well of you for you to think well of yourself. Seneca captured this distinction perfectly. A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials. He sought friction, feedback, even criticism, but as information for growth, not as a measure of his worth. He knew his worth came from his character and his adherence to his values, not from public opinion. The problem with needing external validation is that it's an inherently unstable foundation for confidence. People's opinions change constantly based on factors that have nothing to do with you. Someone might criticize you not because you did anything wrong, but because they're having a bad day. They misunderstood your intentions, they're projecting their own insecurities, or they simply have different values. If your confidence depends on universal approval, you're building on quicksand. Moreover, seeking validation creates perverse incentives. You start making decisions based not on what you believe is right, but on what you think will earn approval. You censor your authentic self, perform for your audience, chase metrics that don't matter. I see this everywhere now. People agonizing over how many followers they have, how many likes a post received, whether they're being invited to the right events, whether they're being perceived as successful. The anxiety is palpable, and the confidence is nowhere to be found. Epictetus offered a radical alternative. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This sounds extreme, but it's liberating. Once you release the need for universal approval, you're free to actually be yourself, to take risks, to pursue what matters to you rather than what impresses others. And paradoxically, this is when real confidence emerges, because it's rooted in internal alignment rather than external metrics. Here's what Stoic detachment actually looks like in practice. It doesn't mean you don't care about anyone's opinion ever. It means you carefully distinguish between whose opinions contain valuable information and whose don't. It means you can hear criticism without being destroyed by it, and praise without becoming dependent on it. It means your self-assessment comes primarily from your own values and standards rather than from external feedback. I learned this lesson painfully in my own life. After years of unconsciously seeking validation through social media, I conducted an experiment. I deleted all social media apps from my phone for 30 days. No checking likes, comments, follow accounts, nothing. The first few days were uncomfortable, like breaking any addiction. But something remarkable happened around day 10. Without the constant feedback loop, I started making decisions based purely on what I thought was right or interesting. I shared work because I believed in it, not because I thought it would perform well. I had conversations because I valued them, not because they were with important people. By the end of the month, I felt more confident than I had in years, not because anyone had validated me, quite the opposite, but because I'd proven to myself that I didn't need constant validation to function. My sense of worth came from within, from my efforts, my values, my growth. This was Stoic detachment in action. The practice has several layers. The first is catching yourself when you're seeking validation. Notice when you're about to share something primarily for approval. Notice when you're crafting an email more to impress than to communicate. Notice when someone's criticism hits harder than it should. These moments of awareness are the first step. The second layer is questioning the source. Marcus Aurelius asked himself constantly, does what happened keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness? Notice what's not on that list. Being liked, being praised, being popular. He measured himself against internal standards, virtues, not external metrics. When someone criticizes you, the Stoic response isn't to immediately defend yourself or feel wounded. It's to ask, is this criticism valid based on my own standards? Is there useful information here? If yes, you extract the lesson and thank them. If no, you acknowledge their perspective and move on. Either way, your confidence remains intact because it's not dependent on their opinion. The third layer is actively cultivating internal validation. This is where journaling becomes powerful. Instead of scrolling for likes, write down what you did today that aligns with your values. Instead of seeking praise, honestly assess your own efforts. Instead of comparing yourself to others, track your own growth. This builds a habit of looking inward for assessment rather than outward. There's a story about Epictetus that illustrates this perfectly. A student came to him, anxious about what others thought of him. Epictetus asked, "Why do you care what someone thinks of you when you wouldn't care what you thought of them?" The student was confused. Epictetus explained, "You don't spend your days worrying about whether you approve of random strangers. Why would you spend your days worried about whether they approve of you?" The asymmetry reveals the absurdity. This doesn't mean become arrogant or dismissive of all feedback. The Stoics valued humility and wisdom, which includes recognizing that we don't have all the answers. But there's a crucial difference between being open to learning from others and needing their approval for your self-worth. One is wisdom, the other is weakness. Let me offer a practical framework for developing this detachment. First, identify whose opinions actually matter to you, not because of their status or power, but because you respect their wisdom and judgment. Maybe it's a mentor, a close friend, a family member. These are people whose feedback you'll genuinely consider. Everyone else? Their opinions are just noise, neither inherently good nor bad, just not particularly relevant to your growth. Second, develop clear internal standards. What are your values? What does success mean to you, independent of social metrics? What would you be proud of, even if no one ever knew about it? These become your measuring stick instead of likes, followers, or public praise. Write them down, review them regularly, measure yourself against them. Third, practice small acts of nonconformity. This isn't about being contrarian for its own sake. It's about regularly doing things that you believe are right, even when you know others might not approve. Maybe it's expressing an unpopular opinion thoughtfully. Maybe it's pursuing a project that doesn't fit current trends. Maybe it's simply not performing for the crowd in small daily interactions. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you're building detachment muscles. Fourth, reframe criticism and praise as equivalent. They're both just information. When someone praises you, notice it, appreciate it, but don't let it inflate your ego or become something you need. When someone criticizes you, notice it, evaluate it objectively, extract any useful information, but don't let it crush you. The Stoic stands in the middle, receiving both with equanimity. Seneca practiced this by periodically imagining losing everything that could earn him approval, his wealth, his position, his reputation. By mentally rehearsing being stripped of all external validation, he ensured his confidence didn't depend on maintaining it. You can do a gentler version. Imagine if tomorrow no one liked your social media posts, or you got harsh criticism at work, or you weren't invited to something you expected. If that would devastate you, your confidence is too externally dependent. Here's the beautiful freedom that comes from this practice. Once you stop needing external validation, you can actually engage with others more authentically. You're not performing, not managing impressions, not carefully calibrating everything for approval. You can say what you actually think, pursue what you actually value, be who you actually are. And counterintuitively, this authenticity often earns more genuine respect than performative approval seeking ever could. The confidence that emerges from detachment is qualitatively different from validation-dependent confidence. It's quiet, steady, unshakable. It doesn't require constant maintenance through likes and praise. It doesn't collapse when criticized. It's rooted in something stable, your own assessment of whether you're living according to your values. Here's your challenge, the practical application. For one full day, engage in complete detachment from external validation. Don't check social media metrics. Don't fish for compliments. Don't adjust your behavior to impress anyone. Simply act according to your own values and standards, completely indifferent to whether anyone approves. At the end of the day, journal about the experience. How did it feel? What did you notice? What changed? Most people discover that nothing catastrophic happens when they stop seeking validation. The world keeps turning. Relationships continue. Work gets done. But something internal shifts. A sense of freedom, of authenticity, of confidence that doesn't depend on the fickle winds of public opinion. The Stoics promised that this path leads to genuine freedom, what they called apatheia. Not in the sense of not caring about anything, but in the sense of not being emotionally controlled by things outside your power. And what's more outside your power than other people's opinions? Release the need for external validation, and you'll discover something remarkable. The confidence you are seeking outside yourself has been waiting inside all along. I avoided thinking about death for most of my life. Like many people, I treated mortality as an abstract concept, something that happened to other people in the distant future, not something relevant to how I live today. Then one afternoon, I received news that a friend, someone my age and seemingly healthy, had died suddenly. The shock was profound, but what followed was even more striking. A crystal-clear awareness that I'd been living as though I had infinite time, wasting hours on trivialities while my actual days were slipping away unnoticed. This wake-up call is what the Stoics deliberately cultivated through a practice they called memento mori. Remember, you will die. To modern ears, this sounds morbid, even depressing. Why would thinking about death help you build confidence or live better? But the Stoics understood something profound. Acknowledging mortality isn't about dwelling on death. It's about fully inhabiting life. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire while facing wars, plagues, and the constant proximity of death, wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't pessimism or fatalism. It was a tool for clarity, for cutting through the trivial concerns and external pressures that cloud our judgment and diminish our confidence. When you genuinely recognize that your time is finite and unpredictable, you stop waiting for permission to live fully. Think about how most people operate. We act as though we have unlimited time. We postpone meaningful conversations. We tolerate unfulfilling situations. We put off pursuing what actually matters. We spend hours on activities we'd be embarrassed to admit consumed our day. We delay difficult decisions. We wait for the right time to start that project, have that conversation, make that change. And underlying all of this is an unconscious assumption. There will always be more time. Memento mori destroys that illusion, and in destroying it, liberates you. When you regularly contemplate your mortality, not in a fearful or anxious way, but in a clear-eyed, accepting way, everything shifts. Suddenly, the opinion of that person who annoys you seems less important. The fear of embarrassment or failure seems less paralyzing. The urgency to live according to your values becomes undeniable. Seneca, who spent years living under the threat of execution by the Emperor Nero and was eventually forced to take his own life, wrote extensively about mortality. His perspective wasn't dark or defeated, it was energizing. Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. Notice the confidence in that approach. When you live each day as though it might be your last, you're not paralyzed by fear. You're liberated from trivial concerns. You say what needs to be said. You do what matters most. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. You act with clarity and purpose because you recognize that delay is a luxury you might not have. This practice directly builds confidence in several ways. First, it creates urgency without anxiety. Many people struggle with procrastination, endlessly preparing and planning, but never actually executing. Memento mori cuts through this. If you had 1 year left to live, would you spend another month perfecting your plan, or would you start today? The awareness of mortality makes the choice obvious, and that clarity breeds confidence in action. Second, it provides perspective on fear. Many of our fears are rooted in imagined future consequences: embarrassment, failure, rejection, loss. But when you regularly contemplate the ultimate loss, your own death, these lesser fears shrink to their proper proportion. Will this presentation matter in 100 years? Will anyone remember this failure? Does this person's opinion of you have any real significance in the scope of your finite existence? The answer is almost always no, and that recognition is profoundly freeing. Epictetus taught this explicitly to his students. When facing difficulty, he'd remind them, "Keep death and exile before your eyes each day, along with everything that seems terrible. By doing so, you'll never have a base thought, nor will you have excessive desire." He wasn't trying to depress his students. He was trying to give them confidence through perspective. Let me share a modern application. I know someone who was offered a significant job opportunity that would require relocating and disrupting their comfortable life. They agonized over the decision for weeks, paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. Then they asked themselves, if I knew I had 1 year to live, which choice would I regret not making? The answer was immediate and clear. Within days, they'd accepted the opportunity. The awareness of mortality cut through the fog of fear and revealed what actually mattered. This is memento mori in action, not making you afraid of death, but making you more confident about life. When you recognize that your time is limited and precious, you stop squandering it on things that don't align with your values. You stop seeking approval from people whose opinions don't actually matter. You stop tolerating situations that drain you. You start living with intention. The practice also creates a profound form of gratitude that feeds confidence. When you acknowledge that each day is a gift that might be your last, even ordinary moments become precious. The conversation with a friend, the morning coffee, the work you get to do, the challenges you get to face. All of it takes on greater significance when viewed through the lens of mortality. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this constantly. It is not death that a man should fear, but rather he should fear never beginning to live. This captures the essence of the practice. The real tragedy isn't dying. That's inevitable and outside your control. The real tragedy is reaching the end of your life and realizing you never really lived fully because you were too afraid, too concerned with others' opinions, too busy waiting for ideal conditions. Here's how to actually practice memento mori in a way that builds confidence rather than anxiety. First, each morning, take a moment to acknowledge that this day is not guaranteed. You might have 20 more years, or you might have 20 more hours. You don't know, and you can't control it. But you can control how you live today. Ask yourself, if this were my last day, how would I want to spend it? What would I make sure to say or do? Then, to whatever extent possible, do that. This isn't about living recklessly or abandoning responsibility. The Stoics weren't advocating hedonism or impulsivity. They were advocating purposeful, intentional living. If today were your last, you probably wouldn't spend it scrolling social media or nursing petty resentments or procrastinating on meaningful work. You'd focus on what actually matters. Second, periodically conduct what Seneca called a retreat into yourself. Sit quietly and contemplate your mortality directly. Imagine your death, not in a frightening way, but realistically. Imagine your funeral. What would you want said about you? What would you hope you'd accomplished? What relationships would you want to have nurtured? What would you regret not doing? This exercise clarifies priorities like nothing else can. Third, use mortality as a decision-making tool. When facing a difficult choice or feeling paralyzed by fear, ask, what would I do if I had 1 year left? Or, Will this matter when I'm on my deathbed? These questions have remarkable power to cut through confusion and reveal what's actually important versus what only seems important. The ancient Stoics sometimes took this practice quite literally. Seneca would periodically spend time in cemeteries, contemplating the lives of those buried there. Marcus Aurelius would imagine his own death regularly. This might seem morbid to our death-avoidant culture, but it had practical psychological benefits. By familiarizing themselves with mortality, they removed its power to terrify and control them. There's also a social dimension to memento mori that builds confidence. When you acknowledge that both you and everyone you interact with are mortal and temporary, it changes how you engage. Petty conflicts seem less worth pursuing. Grudges seem pointless. The impulse to prove yourself right or win arguments diminishes. Instead, you find yourself more focused on genuine connection, on saying what matters, on being present with people while you can. I've noticed this in my own life. Since regularly practicing memento mori, I'm much more likely to reach out to people I care about, to express appreciation, to have difficult but important conversations rather than avoiding them. There's a confidence that comes from knowing you're not leaving things unsaid or undone. You're not waiting for tomorrow to live fully. The practice also provides unexpected comfort in the face of actual loss or difficulty. When you've spent time contemplating mortality, death itself becomes less terrifying. You've made peace with the one certain future we all share. This doesn't mean you don't grieve losses or that you're reckless with your life. It means you're not paralyzed by death anxiety, and that freedom translates into greater confidence in living. Here's the profound paradox. By regularly confronting the reality of death, you become more fully alive. The activities that once seemed so important but actually weren't, chasing status, accumulating possessions, nursing grievances, seeking approval, naturally fall away when viewed against the backdrop of mortality. What remains is what actually matters: meaningful relationships, purposeful work, personal growth, living according to your values. This creates a particular quality of confidence that's both humble and unshakable. You're humble because you recognize your time is finite and your life is one small part of a vast cosmos. But you're confident because you know you're living intentionally, aligned with what actually matters, not wasting your precious days on trivial concerns. Let me give you a practical exercise to begin cultivating this perspective. Tonight, before you sleep, spend 5 minutes in quiet reflection on your mortality. Not in a fearful way, just acknowledging it as a fact. Imagine yourself at the end of your life, looking back. What would you want to have done with this time? What would you regret? Then ask, how can I live tomorrow in a way that moves me toward the life I want to have lived? Do this practice daily for a week and notice what changes. You might find yourself naturally prioritizing differently, saying yes to what matters and no to what doesn't, taking action you've been postponing, engaging more fully with people and experiences, speaking more honestly, worrying less about trivial concerns, living with more intention and confidence. The Stoics didn't practice memento mori to become gloomy or fatalistic. They practiced it to become free, free from the tyranny of trivial concerns, free from the paralysis of fear, free to live fully and confidently in the present moment. Marcus Aurelius, even while ruling an empire, carried this perspective. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now, take what's left and live it properly. That's the gift of memento mori, the confidence to live properly, fully, intentionally. Not someday when conditions are perfect, but right now, while you still can. Because the only moment you're guaranteed is this one. The Stoics knew it 2,000 years ago, and now you know it too. What will you do with that knowledge? On my bookshelf sits a stack of journals spanning nearly 15 years. Some entries are mundane, daily observations, passing thoughts. Others mark turning points, difficult decisions, painful failures, unexpected breakthroughs. But what strikes me most when I flip through these pages isn't the content itself. It's the visible arc of growth, the patterns that become obvious only in retrospect, and the undeniable evidence of who I've become through conscious reflection. This practice, which I initially started casually, has become one of the most powerful confidence-building tools I possess. The Stoics understood this instinctively. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, perhaps the most famous Stoic text, wasn't written for publication. It was his personal journal, private reflections, reminders to himself, philosophical exercises. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet he spent time almost daily writing to clarify his thinking, reinforce his principles, and work through challenges. If the Emperor of Rome needed journaling to maintain his confidence and clarity, perhaps we all do. Journaling works for confidence building in ways that are both obvious and subtle. The obvious benefit is clarity. When thoughts swirl chaotically in your mind, anxieties, decisions, reactions, plans, they remain vague and overwhelming. The act of writing forces structure. You must choose words, create sentences, organize ideas. This process alone often reveals solutions or perspectives that were invisible while thoughts remained internal. Seneca wrote letters to friends, to himself, to imagined audiences as a form of philosophical practice. We should every night call ourselves to an account, he advised. What infirmity have I mastered today? What passions opposed? What temptation resisted? What virtue acquired? This nightly examination, recorded in writing, served as both mirror and map, showing him who he was and pointing toward who he wanted to become. But the deeper benefit of journaling is the development of what we might call self-trust, which is the bedrock of genuine confidence. Every time you write honestly about your experiences, thoughts, and feelings, you're strengthening your relationship with yourself. You're proving that your inner life matters enough to document. You're creating space to hear your own voice without the noise of external opinions. And over time, you're building a record that demonstrates your growth, resilience, and capability. Consider what happens when you face a new challenge. Without a journaling practice, you might feel inadequate, overwhelmed by doubt. You might think, I've never done anything like this before. I don't know if I can. But when you have years of journal entries documenting previous challenges you've overcome, failures you've survived, growth you've achieved, the narrative changes. You can literally flip back through pages and remind yourself, I felt this same doubt before that presentation, and I succeeded. I was this scared before moving cities, and I thrived. I thought I couldn't handle that loss, but I did. The evidence is undeniable because you documented it yourself. This is fundamentally different from external validation. When someone else tells you you're capable, it's nice, but ultimately uncertain. They might be wrong, biased, or simply being kind. When you tell yourself you're capable based on documented evidence of your own journey, it's unshakable. You were there. You know what you've overcome. The confidence that comes from this self-knowledge is profound. Marcus Aurelius used his journal for this exact purpose. Throughout his meditations, he reminds himself of Stoic principles he might forget under pressure. You have power over your mind, not outside events. The impediment to action advances action. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He wasn't discovering these ideas while writing. He already knew them. He was reinforcing them, building neural pathways of wisdom through repetition and reflection. You can do the same. When you read something insightful, write about how it applies to your life. When you handle a situation well, document what you did and why it worked. When you fail, record what you learned. This creates a personalized wisdom repository that grows more valuable over time. Years later, when facing a similar challenge, you can access not just general advice, but your own hard-won insights. The practice also serves as an emotional regulation tool, which directly supports confidence. When you're overwhelmed by anxiety, anger, or self-doubt, these emotions can feel all-consuming. But when you sit down and write, "I'm feeling anxious about this presentation. Let me examine why," something shifts. The emotion becomes an object you're examining rather than a force controlling you. You create distance, perspective, the ability to respond rather than react. Epictetus taught his students to examine their impressions, the automatic judgments and interpretations that create our emotional responses. Journaling is the perfect medium for this practice. When something upsets you, write it out. My boss criticized my work, and I immediately felt worthless and angry. Then examine, is that impression accurate? Did she say I was worthless, or did she point out specific improvements? Is my entire self-worth defined by one project? What would a wiser response look like? This written dialogue with yourself builds emotional intelligence and self-control, which we've already identified as crucial to confidence. The person who can regulate their emotions through reflective writing has a massive advantage over someone who's simply buffeted by every feeling. They're demonstrating to themselves on paper that they have agency over their inner life. Let me offer specific journaling techniques that align with Stoic practice and build confidence. First, the morning intention practice. Each morning, spend 5 to 10 minutes writing about the day ahead. What challenges might you face? How do you want to show up? What Stoic principles might be tested? Marcus did this constantly. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. By anticipating difficulties, he ensured they wouldn't catch him off guard. Your version might look like, today I have that difficult conversation with my colleague. I want to stay calm, listen fully, and speak honestly without defensiveness. I'll remember that I can't control their response, only my own behavior. If it goes poorly, I'll use it as an opportunity to practice patience. Writing this sets an intention that's far more powerful than a vague hope to do well. Second, the evening review. Seneca's practice of calling yourself to account each night remains powerfully relevant. Spend 10 minutes before bed reviewing your day. What went well? Where did you live according to your values? Where did you fall short? What did you learn? This isn't about self-judgment, it's about self-awareness and growth. The key is honesty. Don't perform for an imaginary audience or sugarcoat failures. Marcus Aurelius was brutally honest with himself about his shortcomings, his temptations, his struggles. That honesty is what made his journaling effective. When you write truthfully about both your successes and failures, you're building a relationship with yourself based on reality rather than illusion. And confidence rooted in reality is the only confidence that lasts. Third, the gratitude practice. The Stoics emphasized recognizing and appreciating what you have rather than fixating on what you lack. Each day, write down 3 specific things you're grateful for. Not generic entries, I'm grateful for my health, but specific moments. I'm grateful for the conversation I had with Sarah this morning, where she really listened and offered thoughtful advice. This practice trains your attention toward abundance rather than scarcity, which fundamentally shifts your emotional baseline and confidence. 4th, the fear examination. When you're afraid of something, a decision, a conversation, an outcome, write about it in detail. What exactly are you afraid of? What's the worst-case scenario? If that happened, how would you handle it? What's the most likely scenario? What can you control versus what you can't? This is negative visualization translated into writing, and it's remarkably effective at diminishing the power of fear. I've used this technique before every major decision or challenge for years. Before a career transition that terrified me, I spent an hour journaling about all my fears. Once they were on paper, most seemed far less scary. The few that remained serious I could then address practically. If this doesn't work out, I could do X, Y, or Z. The confidence to proceed came from that written examination. 5th, the wisdom collection. As you go through life, you'll encounter insights from books, conversations, experiences. Capture them in your journal with your own reflections. Don't just copy quotes. Write about what they mean to you, how they apply to your life, examples of when you've seen them proven true or false. Over time, you'll build a personalized philosophy that reflects your deepest understanding. Marcus did this constantly, weaving together teachings from various Stoic philosophers with his own observations. His Meditations is essentially his wisdom collection. You don't need to write something that profound. You just need to write something true for you. That collection becomes a resource you can return to when you need guidance, and the act of creating it builds your philosophical muscles. There's also tremendous value in tracking your growth explicitly. Every few months, review your past journal entries. You'll be amazed at how much you've changed, how challenges that seemed insurmountable were overcome, how fears that seemed rational were unfounded. This retrospective view provides undeniable evidence of your resilience and capability. When you can see your own growth documented over months or years, confidence becomes inevitable. It's simply an acknowledgement of demonstrated reality. Some practical considerations. Don't worry about writing quality. Your journal isn't literature. It's a tool. Write messily, incompletely, imperfectly. The value is in the practice, not the product. Also, maintain privacy. If you're worried about someone reading your journal, you won't write honestly. Find a secure method, whether that's a physical journal you keep hidden, an encrypted digital file, or whatever allows complete candor. Consistency matters more than length. Better to write 3 sentences daily than to write for an hour once a month. Marcus Aurelius was running an empire, commanding armies, managing crises, yet he found time for regular reflection. You can find 10 minutes. And those 10 minutes, compounded over years, create transformation. There's something almost magical about rereading your own words months or years later. You meet your past self, see your journey with clarity, recognize patterns you couldn't see while living through them. I've had countless moments of flipping back through old journals and thinking, I completely forgot I was struggling with that. And look, I figured it out. I survived. I grew. That recognition is confidence fuel of the highest quality. The practice also makes you a better thinker. Writing forces precision. You can't hide in vague generalities on paper the way you can in your head. When you write, "I'm feeling bad," you're prompted to ask, what kind of bad? Why? What specifically happened? This precision of thought translates into precision of action, which builds competence, which builds confidence. Seneca believed that writing was thinking. We should hunt out the helpful pieces of teaching and the spirited and noble-minded sayings which are capable of immediate practical application, not far-fetched or archaic expressions or extravagant metaphors and figures of speech, and learn them so well that words become works. Journaling is where words become works, where philosophy becomes practice, where intention becomes action, where thought becomes character. Here's your starting point, your invitation into this practice. Tonight, take out a notebook or open a document. Write for 10 minutes about your day. What happened? How did you respond? What did you learn? What are you grateful for? What could you do better tomorrow? That's it. No pressure for profundity, no concern about style. Just honest reflection. Do it again tomorrow, and the day after. Within a week, you'll notice something shifting. A clearer sense of yourself, a better understanding of your patterns, perhaps the first hints of that self-trust we've been discussing. Within a month, you'll have a resource you can return to. Within a year, you'll have a record of growth that provides undeniable evidence of your capabilities. The Stoics wrote not because they were professional writers, but because writing was essential to their practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote to maintain his sanity and wisdom while facing impossible pressure. Seneca wrote to clarify his thinking and reinforce his principles. Epictetus's students wrote to remember his teachings. They all understood. The unexamined life may not be worth living, but the examined life, documented, reflected upon, learned from, becomes the foundation of wisdom and confidence. Your journal is a conversation with yourself across time. It's your past self reaching out to support your present self. It's your present self creating resources for your future self. It's proof that you're taking your growth seriously, that your inner life matters, that you're committed to becoming who you want to be. That commitment, made visible through consistent practice, is itself a profound form of confidence. So write. Write honestly. Write regularly. Write without judgment. And over time, watch as the practice of putting words on paper transforms not just your thinking, but your character, not just your clarity, but your confidence. The Stoics knew it. Marcus proved it. And now you can experience it yourself. We've journeyed together through 7 Stoic tactics, each one a thread in a larger tapestry of confidence, wisdom, and resilience. You've learned about the power of perspective, the practice of negative visualization, the discipline of voluntary discomfort, the necessity of owning failure, the cultivation of focus, the virtue of self-control, the freedom of detachment, the clarity of memento mori, and the transformative practice of journaling. These aren't just philosophical concepts or motivational ideas. They're practical tools forged over 2 millennia, tested by emperors and slaves alike, and proven across countless lives. But here's what I want you to understand as we close. These tactics aren't meant to be collected like trophies or admired from a distance. They're meant to be practiced daily, imperfectly, persistently. The confidence you seek won't arrive in a single moment of revelation. It will accumulate through thousands of small choices, each one aligning your actions with your values, each one proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you thought. Marcus Aurelius never achieved perfection. Read his meditations carefully, and you'll see him struggling, reminding himself of the same principles repeatedly, catching himself in the same mistakes. Yet he kept practicing. Seneca, despite teaching about self-control and detachment, admitted to his own struggles with temptation and opinion. Epictetus, who spoke so powerfully about freedom, lived in chains for years. None of them were superhuman. They were simply committed to the practice. That's the real secret of Stoic confidence. It's not about becoming a different person or achieving some impossible standard. It's about showing up each day and practicing, about falling short and trying again, about incrementally becoming more aligned with the person you want to be. Each small practice compounds. Each moment of choosing perspective over panic, action over avoidance, principle over convenience. These moments accumulate into a life of confidence and character. Think back to where we started. Confidence as something you could build methodically and purposefully. You now have the blueprint. When challenges arise, and they will, you can pause and apply perspective, asking what's within your control. When fear emerges, you can practice negative visualization, imagining the worst and discovering you could survive it. When comfort tempts you toward complacency, you can choose voluntary discomfort, training your resilience. When failure strikes, you can own it completely, extracting lessons rather than nursing wounds. When distraction calls, you can marshal your focus, remembering that your attention is your most valuable resource. When impulses threaten to derail you, you can exercise self-control, proving to yourself that you're in command. When you find yourself seeking validation, you can practice detachment, returning to your internal standards. When trivial concerns cloud your judgment, you can invoke memento mori, remembering that your time is finite and precious. And through it all, you can journal, documenting your journey and building evidence of your growth. These practices work in concert, each reinforcing the others. Perspective helps you accept failure. Negative visualization builds self-control. Voluntary discomfort strengthens focus. Detachment supports memento mori. Journaling illuminates all of it. You're not learning 7 separate techniques. You're developing an integrated philosophy of life that naturally produces confidence as a byproduct of living well. I want to be honest with you about what this path requires. It requires patience. Our culture promises instant transformation. 6-minute abs, 7-day confidence programs, one weird trick to change your life. Stoicism offers something different and far more valuable, a lifelong practice that delivers real, lasting results. You won't transform overnight, but you will transform if you commit to consistent practice. It requires honesty. You can't fake your way through Stoic practice. The journaling only works if you're truthful. The self-control only develops if you acknowledge where you're lacking it. The ownership of failure only transforms you if you actually own it, rather than performing ownership while secretly blaming circumstances. The Stoics valued truth above comfort, and you must too. It requires humility. You'll fail at these practices regularly. You'll lose your temper despite practicing self-control. You'll seek validation despite practicing detachment. You'll get distracted despite practicing focus. This doesn't mean the practices don't work. It means you're human. The victory isn't in never failing. It's in returning to practice after each failure. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, when you wake up, return to your practice. Not if you wake up perfect, not when you've mastered everything. When you wake up, imperfect and struggling, return to practice. But here's what this path offers in return. Freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of circumstance, from the paralysis of fear, from the exhausting need for external validation, from the chaos of unexamined emotion. The Stoics called this ataraxia, tranquility, inner peace, the confidence of someone who knows that no matter what happens externally, they remain intact internally. You'll face difficult days ahead, failures that hurt, losses that wound, challenges that test you. The Stoics don't promise you'll avoid these. They promise you'll handle them differently. Where once you might have collapsed in overwhelm, you'll pause and apply perspective. Where once you might have avoided difficulty, you'll face it with the resilience you've trained. Where once you might have needed approval to feel confident, you'll find that confidence waiting inside, unmoved by external opinion. This is the gift of Stoicism. Not a life without difficulty, but unshakable confidence in your ability to handle difficulty. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. Not freedom from failure, but wisdom to learn from it. Not immunity to emotion, but mastery over whether emotion masters you. Let me offer you a vision of what your life could look like with these practices integrated. Imagine waking up with clarity about your priorities, undistracted by trivial concerns. Imagine facing your day's challenges with calm focus rather than anxious avoidance. Imagine responding to criticism by extracting useful information rather than feeling wounded. Imagine pursuing meaningful goals without paralyzing fear of failure, because you know failure is just feedback. Imagine feeling genuinely confident, not because everything is going well, but because you know you can handle whatever comes. This isn't fantasy. It's the demonstrated result of Stoic practice across 2,000 years and countless practitioners. It's available to you right now through commitment to practice. Not someday when conditions are perfect or when you've finished preparing. Today, now, with the very next choice you make. So here's your call to action, your invitation to become your Stoic self. Choose one practice from this journey that resonates most deeply. Maybe it's the morning intention setting and evening review. Maybe it's voluntary discomfort, like cold showers. Maybe it's the practice of pausing before reacting. Maybe it's memento mori reflection. Pick one and commit to practicing it daily for the next 30 days. Don't try to implement everything simultaneously. That's a recipe for overwhelm and abandonment. Master one practice until it becomes natural, then add another. Build gradually, sustainably, with the patience of someone planting an oak tree rather than growing a mushroom. The Stoics thought in terms of decades, not days. They were building character, not chasing quick wins. Track your practice in a journal. Notice what changes, not just in dramatic moments, but in subtle shifts in how you handle daily challenges. After 30 days, assess honestly. Has this practice affected your confidence, your clarity, your resilience? Then choose another practice to add. Within a year, you'll have integrated multiple Stoic tactics into your daily life, and the cumulative effect will be transformative. Connect with others on this path if you can. The Stoics, despite their emphasis on inner work, valued community. Epictetus taught students. Seneca wrote letters to friends. Marcus, despite his solitary journaling, surrounded himself with philosophical advisors. You don't have to walk this path alone. Share what you're learning. Discuss these ideas. Support each other's practice. Remember that this is not about becoming perfect or achieving some final state of enlightenment. Stoicism is a practice, not a destination. You don't graduate. You simply continue showing up day after day, applying these principles to whatever life presents. Some days you'll do it brilliantly. Other days, you'll struggle. Both are part of the practice. And when you do struggle, when you lose your temper, seek validation, get distracted, avoid discomfort, remember Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who daily reminded himself of basic principles because he needed those reminders. Remember Seneca, the wealthy statesman who admitted to struggling with his desires. Remember Epictetus, the former slave who never stopped teaching because he never stopped needing to hear the lessons himself. Your struggles don't disqualify you from this practice. They're the raw material of the practice. Every moment you catch yourself seeking external validation is an opportunity to practice detachment. Every time you feel overwhelmed is an opportunity to practice perspective. Every failure is an opportunity to practice ownership. The practice isn't separate from life. It is life, fully engaged with. The confidence you'll develop through this practice is different from what our culture typically celebrates. It's not loud or boastful. It doesn't require constant maintenance through likes and praise. It doesn't collapse when challenged. It's quiet, solid, unshakable. The confidence of someone who knows they've done the work, faced their fears, owned their failures, and continued showing up regardless. This confidence isn't about believing you'll never struggle. It's about knowing you can struggle and survive, even grow. It's not about being fearless. It's about acting courageously despite fear. It's not about never failing. It's about learning from failure and trying again. It's not about controlling outcomes. It's about controlling your response to any outcome. That's the Stoic promise. Inner freedom, regardless of external circumstance. Confidence that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. Peace that external chaos cannot disturb. Not because nothing difficult happens, but because you've trained yourself to handle whatever happens with wisdom, courage, and grace. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius wrote these words in his journal, never imagining they'd be read across millennia. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. That same invitation extends to you now. Waste no more time wondering how to be confident. Practice these tactics. Build the habits. Do the work. Become the person who embodies confidence through character rather than performance. The path is clear. The tools are in your hands. The only question remaining is, will you walk it? Will you commit to the daily practice of becoming your Stoic self? The choice, as it always is in Stoicism, is entirely yours. And that choice, made consciously and repeatedly, is where confidence begins. Welcome to your Stoic journey. The work starts now, and it never ends. But that's not a burden. It's a gift. As long as you're practicing, you're growing. As long as you're growing, you're alive in the fullest sense. And as long as you're alive, you have the opportunity to demonstrate courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance, the 4 Stoic virtues that, when practiced consistently, naturally produce the confidence you seek. So, practice. Fall short. Practice again. Build gradually. Trust the process. And over time, you'll discover what the Stoics knew. True confidence isn't found. It's forged, one conscious choice at a time, through the consistent application of timeless principles to everyday life. This is your path now. Walk it with courage. Walk it with honesty. Walk it with patience. And watch as the confidence you've been seeking emerges naturally from the person you're becoming. The Stoics are with you, and so am I. Now go. Practice. Become.